for we indigenous people, Black and brown people, the apocalypse has happened. We've been through slavery, genocide, colonialism, dispossession, poverty. We've been through the dislocation of our families, mass rape. We've had our lives, our cosmology, our identity formation, the very foundations of who we are ripped apart and turned upside down. That happened to us.
What the actual What's good, my people? If you do not know by now, I am Tiffany Kagure Mugo, a dream to some and a nightmare to others. Welcome to What Is This Hot Mess? A podcast that chills with fire feminists from across the globe to have conversations about the fact that the world is kind of hot trash right now. It's all about diving into the fact that this kind of feels like the end times, and in the same breath, looking at the feminists who are helping us keep the garbage at bay. They do this by telling the world to pick its fascism off the floor and put away its hate, violence, and general nonsense. Basically telling it to clean up its act. In this episode, we have the magnificent, the unshakable, the absolute legend, the unborable Lebo Mashile. Lock in because we're about to capital B bio. Lebo Mashile is a genre-defying multi-hyphenate force. She is a South African poet, playwright, recording artist, performer, and cultural producer whose work has redefined the boundaries of art, activism, and African storytelling over the past 25 years. She conjures poetry that is equal parts spell, song, and strategy. Her debut poetry collection, In a Rainbow of Rhythm, won the Noma Award for Publishing in Africa, and her groundbreaking play, Venus vs. Modernity, is a sonic and theatrical exploration of Sarah Baartman's legacy. This play toured internationally and is being adapted for print and soundtrack release. And she's not just confined to the stage because she has scripted and produced and presented award-winning television shows such as Latitude and Great Expectations, and has worked with major brands like Netflix and MTN and Castle Milk Stout, for those of you who love a good beer. This magical being is a committed mother, spiritual seeker, and wellness advocate, and embodies a multi-dimensional Black womanhood that is as fierce as it is soft. I could spend the rest of the podcast listing the accolades and achievements, but let me pause here. This one is a titan. A little top of the pod PSA. This episode epitomizes what this podcast is all about. A hot mess of a conversation about a hot mess of a situation. Chaotic everything is a good description. But just so you know, it takes us through Lebo's journey to becoming an artistic legend, how Black women go through it personally and professionally, as well as the complexity of being a feminist and how you really should be kind to yourself. And also a bunch of random ad-libs. So a warning, this podcast is exactly what it needed to be, and it will not be tamed. Also, Lebo and I had us a good time. Welcome to the Funhouse.
Are we rolling already?
Yeah, he recorded and then he just wanders off.
Oh, that's insane. I love that.
These are the side things that we need. These are the side things.
Love it.
Also, look at this. Look at us.
Look at us sitting and talking,
Oh my
Tiffany.
gosh.
After how many years? of mutual admiration society on Twitter?
So many
At
years.
least a decade more.
It is at least a decade. And I even remember the day I got your email address. I don't even remember what it was for.
I even
was very
remember when you were...
excited.
I started following when you were still at UCT, I think.
From back in the day.
From back in the day.
Yeah.
I think that's when I started interacting with you, go Twitter.
Oh my
From
God.
that time.
From all those days. Oh my gosh. Okay, wait, we must start. Told you all of the things happening in this episode. And now that you have a taste of what is to come, let us jump straight into our beloved first segment, the feminist origin story. It's the part where we hear all about how people became card-carrying feminists. Lebo's story is one that resonates around the world. She got it from her mama. And are you even a Black or brown person if you don't have at least one story about a grandmother or a great-grandmother or a mother who shaped the way we saw things in the most powerful and subtle of ways, who strongly and often silently held it down, who managed a multi-generational family with the precision of a coach of a Premier League team? No, you are not. Whether you believe that historically societies were matriarchs or not, side note, I would not recommend going down like Reddit rabbit holes about this. The fellas are big mad about this idea. Anyway, whether you believe it or not, you cannot deny the role of older women in shaping and upbringing of the next generation. Like orcas and elephants, humans have older females who keep the bloodline on track in a myriad of ways. So many of us have the story of how we had an incredible woman running things and being the reason our family is allowed into polite society. I myself have the most magical mom who is the heartbeat of our family and took over from a grandmother who was the most awesome powerhouse. I once had a pastor try and tell me and my female cousins that the only boy in our generation was going to be the future head of the family. We looked at him like, are you lost? Do you even know how this particular lineage works? Get the hell up out of here. Also, he ended up being a bit of a sketchy misogynist, so we should probably take his word with a pinch of salt. The story of a strong woman rings true for Lebo, who found her feminism from the women in the family who consciously and unconsciously lit the fire inside her. What is your feminist origin story? How did it all start?
Oh my gosh, I was thinking about that this morning. Probably family. Mm-hmm. There's such a spectrum of experiences that I can kind of situate myself within when I look at the women in my family. If I think about my grandmothers and my mom called herself a feminist. She was, so I was not, I didn't have to like find feminism out there. My mother described herself as a feminist.
What?
Yeah.
And this was when?
And this was in the 80s, 90s, you know. Mm-hmm. She was Black conscious. She was a feminist.
Hello.
She was a child of 76. So she was the one who was an activist. She was the one who was, you know, my mom was always, when I was growing up, she was always working and studying and doing her activism in those days of the anti-apartheid struggle. She was involved. We lived in Providence, Rhode Island. So she was involved in an organization called Rhode Island Divest, getting universities and businesses and the state of Rhode Island to divest from their interests in South Africa. And I mean, I grew up in the backseat of her car watching her run around and do 50 million things. That's why I do this, you know? My grandmother her mom was a nurse, a matron, and a midwife. Mm-hmm. On the other side of my family, my grandmother she had a very different experience. She wasn't educated, married a man who was a businessman and a boxer, had the foresight before group areas to realize that people were going to be relocated from what was then Western Native Townships of Firetown to Soweto. So my grandfather built a shop in Soweto. My grandmother ran the shop and raised kids, but he beat her mercilessly. So I got to see, you know, what the experiences of women are, you know, based on kind of what choices do you have based on your level of education, mm-hmm. based on your level of dependency on a man. Mm-hmm. What I also got to see that no matter how educated you are or how empowered you are publicly, it's difficult for African women to escape misogyny in the home. In patriarchal relationships, in relationships with men, right? Mm-hmm. So the same women that I saw who were so empowered in the world and empowering other people in the world, I also saw them, you know, take on African patriarchy as a force that broke them down, you know, in the house. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, my experience is very different. It's not different. Sorry, my experience is very similar to the experiences of millions of people who come from this corner of the earth. So, I mean, from my childhood, I was exposed to sexual abuse, patriarchy, misogyny, physical abuse, the usual cooking agents that you meet
the full
the buffet,
the whole buffet.
The buffet. So realizing that buffet also it exists even for women who have choice and agency and power, that was a real eye-opener for me, to see that you don't get spared, and then it became, I think, a personal tool for me when my own kind of identity formation happened when we moved back to South Africa when I was a teenager, discovering my own creative voice later at university, figuring out that I want to be an artist, then all these kind of political principles that were in the environment that I grew up in became a part of my own practice and have remained a part of my own practice. So it's like first principles for me, deconstructing everything, the shit that happens to me, what is happening in the world, my work, everything. I go back to feminism, back to Black consciousness, back to Pan-Africanism,
Yes.
Back to now indigenous spirituality as well, and I feel like we're really lucky to have these tools. And I mean, there's so many, right? There's the Marxism, liberation theory, all this stuff, right? I think, especially in this moment in history, these are real tools of survival. This is what we need to be using all the time to deconstruct everything.
Yeah. So you grew up with these sort of ideologies and also seseeing these dichotomies.
I mean, in the air, it's not like my mom sat me down and said,
was like, here's your pamphlet.
Here's your pamphlet. It was growing up in spaces, following her while she was having her meetings or in her workday or while she was doing her organizing and mobilizing work, eavesdropping on the kind of conversations that they had. I was a kid, they were boring. I wasn't interested. I was annoyed. I hated it.
You weren't there being like, Marxism.
I wasn't there being, this is great. Yeah, housing for everybody. It was like, oh God, please, can I go home and watch The Simpsons? But now realizing that through observing her and participating in her life as a child, she was giving me permission to be more than one thing as a woman. She was giving me permission to have a full life. She was giving me permission to integrate my children into my life and put them at the center of my life, in spite of the fact that my work is also so multifaceted, So, and she was giving me permission, I think, also to travel, because she went into exile so 76 happened, and during 76, I think two of my uncles were at Morris Isaacson. My mother and another one of her brothers were at University of the North, TEFLOP. All of them were activists. They were the 5 kids in the family. Within the space of a year, 4 of them were in exile.
Some history. What was this uprising and how did it change the game? Settle in, kittens, because Tiff is about to take you to school. A history lesson is loading. The Soweto Uprising was a student-led protest that began on June 16, 1976 in Soweto, South Africa, and was an attempt to push back against the then apartheid government's plans to impose the Afrikaans language as a medium of instruction in schools for Black students. Events that triggered the uprising can be traced back to the policies of the apartheid government that resulted in the introduction of the Bantu Education Act in 1953. The June 16 uprising that began in Soweto spread countrywide, profoundly changing the socio-political landscape in South Africa. The rise of the Black consciousness movement and the formation of the South African Students' Organization raised the political consciousness of many students, while others joined the wave of anti-apartheid sentiment within the student community. When the language of Afrikaans, alongside English, was made compulsory as a medium of instruction in schools in 1974, Black students began mobilizing themselves. On June 16th, between 3,000 and 10,000 students were mobilized by the South African Student Movement's Action Committee, supported by the Black Consciousness Movement, and marched peacefully to demonstrate and protest against the government's directive. Whilst peacefully marching, they were met by heavily armed police who fired tear gas and later live ammunition on demonstrating students. This resulted in a widespread revolt that turned into an uprising against the government. The aftermath of the events of June 16th had dire consequences for the apartheid government. Images of the police firing on peacefully demonstrating students led to international condemnation of the apartheid government as its brutality was exposed. Meanwhile, the weakened and exiled liberation movements received new recruits fleeing political persecution at home, giving new viva and energy to the struggle against apartheid. As many of you might know, there is a powerful photo by Sam Zima of a dying 13-year-old Hector Peterson, which epitomizes the brutality and heartbreak of the protests. You think you haven't seen it before, but I'm 100% sure you have.
I mean, it gets called the Soweto uprisings, but they were national student ongoing uprisings that touched many campuses in every province, So education for young people was destabilized that year, And in the year that followed, my mom went into exile in the US, and she left as a student, but it was hot for my family. I mean, the year that she left, my grandmother's house was raided. The security police called my grandmother in to question her. Letters that were going back and forth. Obviously with kids who are living in different parts of the world, her letters would get taken, and by the time she would get them, stuff would be blacked out, or she'd have to be called in and explain, what are you saying in this letter?
Mm-hmm.
So it was stuff like that, which touched the lives of millions and millions of people in this country. But those are like foundational kind of traumas, for many of us, and the choices that she made because of those traumas have really given me the space to free myself. Mm-hmm. Her deciding to leave, and her deciding to be in the US as a student, her deciding to raise a family there, her deciding to come back, and those were extremely difficult decisions at different points. They impacted us sometimes in really hard ways. But now I realize it's given me permission to travel and to be in the world and to see the world as a place that I can inhabit with my work, and to give my children permission also to be Black people in the world.
One thing we understand as Africans is the land. How it moves through you and sits with you and holds your past and present whilst being the stage for your future. Truth be told, I think those who took the land understood this too, which is why they did it. But you know what? That's a conversation for another day, because I don't think some of y'all are ready for that, huh? I once spoke to Nombuso, a brilliant cultural practitioner, who once told me about how there is a belief that the land even holds the traumas of those who reside on it, and gave me the example of the flooding happening in KwaZulu-Natal, and which has also historically happened, which is a result of the bloodshed that has happened on that land. Our histories are riddled with the scars of those who came before us, and those scars are inherited, like trinkets, family heirlooms of a sort. Understanding this gives you a little more agency about what you choose to pass on to future generations. But much as we try, the inheritance we pass on won't always be good vibes. We have heaviness and traumas we sometimes pass on like prized heirlooms. Life is tricky, and being a mother in this world that seems to only want to bring you harm and judgment is even trickier.
It's tough. I think people people like shitting on single moms, you know.
They do.
They shit hard on single moms. People like shitting on older Black women. And I mean, older Black women are not perfect. The aunties are also hectic, and the aunties become more hectic as they age.
They really do.
And I say it as a hectic aging auntie, you know. And I mean, I think especially for that generation, like, you know, therapy was not a thing, right? Emotional intelligence was not a thing. That was a grin and bear it and get on with it generation. And the more you could, the more competent you were at that, you know, the better you did at life. But at the expense of your softness, your sensitivity, you know, your relationships, intimate relationships with people around you, especially your children, especially girl children, you know. So, I mean, the price was heavy, but the gifts are many. I'm grateful for the choices that she made in her life.
That is just the most powerful narrative.
Yay.
So like because as a child of a single mother who did the moving around, not because of exile, right, but because UN baby things, it was that just like that get things done.
Yeah.
Like you were raised by a very practical person.
Yes.
Right? You're raised by somebody who's going to make some decisions, and sure, they may put you on a therapy couch a few years later, as it did me, sitting there being like, I have a fear of flying right now.
Yo.
I traced it back to my fear of moving, but it's fine. But like, I think, like
that's deep,
right?
hey?
In the middle of traveling and things, it was a really hectic period, and I started getting these panic attacks. And then I'm sitting there on the couch. I'm sitting there on my therapist's couch at one point, and I'm like, I don't know how we got onto it. I'm like, I have this fear that if I get on a plane, I will come back and my home is not here.
Oh,
and he's like,
which is such a baby fear, because you got on a plane as a baby, and when you got back, your home was not there.
There would be times when my home was not
and
there.
no one explained to you.
Right.
They just said, we're going.
We're going. We're moving to the States. You are moving to the UK. We are moving to Tanzania.
And mom is like, you have a home because I'm here.
I'm here. But like, as your kid, like you see other kids and they've got like, you know, they know where their stuffed toys are. Even though this is not the point of this podcast.
I feel you on that one. Oh my gosh. Yeah,
like these ones. So I listened to a podcast. Yes, that is my equivalent of an academic saying, I read a paper. Anyway, I listened to a podcast that said diversity is actually the key to innovation. No, this podcast came out before like DEI was like hot, right? But it was talking about how different identities were the key to growth and was actually the spark that made the magic happen. Sitting in silos of similarity didn't make things move forward, but actually bred complacency and caused stagnation. The podcast stated that a team with diverse voices and opinions actually had a wider, broader view of the situation, allowing for far more innovative and more effective problem solving. Diversity is a superpower. Instead of seeing one path through one lens, you see multiple paths. This holds true even within the self. Allowing for all parts of your existence to come together like a council of elders is powerful because you exist as a complex, magical human being. You can be like, no, girl, we need to break up with him because the economist in us sees that this is not financially feasible. I know that Disney Princess believes in happily ever after, but Prince Charming over here is not the one. This notion segues very nicely to the idea of intersectionality. So buckle in, my babies. It's time for some feminist learning. So for those of you who have been living under a feminist rock, intersectionality is a framework for understanding how different aspects of a person's social and political identity, such as race, gender, class, and sexuality, can create overlapping and unique experiences of discrimination or privilege. This awesome vibe was first coined in 1989 by legal scholar and legend Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality in a series of essays to describe how overlapping forms of discrimination, like race and gender, create uniquely compounded disadvantages, particularly for Black women. A little extra linguistic lesson, Misogynoir, a term referring to the unholy alliance between anti-Black racism and misogyny directed towards Black women. A portmanteau is a word that combines misogyny and the French word for black, noir. It It was coined by Black queer feminist writer Professor Moya Bailey in 2010. Fun fact, this word was added to the Merriam-Webster's dictionary in 2023. This framework of understanding pertains to discrimination, but also speaks to the power of having a myriad of views of the world. During one particularly fun lunch with my dad, I explained to him why sometimes, despite being a prominent Kenyan man who has all the homegrown advantages and privileges, he leaves and wanders out into the world and gets treated a little bit differently, a little bit in a way that he sometimes does not care for. I was like, sir, in some parts of the world, you are not this titan of industry you are back home. You're just a Black African man who is no different from the Black African man who drives a cab or opens up the door of a penthouse building. You're just a guy. You're just a Black guy. Man's mind was blown. And I think we have another Crenshaw convert. Okay, maybe that's taking it a little bit too far, but I feel like I have sowed the seed. He at least knows the word intersectionality now. Like, that's a start, right? But I digress. Holding on to the different parts that form the sum of the whole is how Lebo became the artist that she is. Despite being thrust into the American landscape, keeping her South African identities and being told to question dominant narratives was her superpower. What sort of woman did you blossom into? And like, how have you navigated, built the career that you have? Like, you have a career. Like, Googling you is a lot, right? Googling you is a lot. I'm just here being like, okay, so what must I put in the bio? Because even the bio you sent to me, baby, I cannot read the whole thing every day. So how did you, like, you've started touching on like how your mother gave you the permission, and also like, how did you build it? And also just tell us a little bit about it. Because, you know, for those of people who are not Googleable, like who are not Googlers, but yeah.
What a question. Okay, so we came back to South Africa when I was 16 years old. Prior to that, I grew up in a place called Providence, Rhode Island, which is on the northeast coast of America. Rhode Island is the smallest state. It's known for universities and as a kind of white liberal holiday town. But the other side of it is that it's chock-a-block full of immigrants. It's 3 hours from New York. So, you know, people like my parents, for example, you know, they met in New York and they didn't want to raise kids in New York because of the intensity of New York. So, you know, it's the kind of place you travel up the freeway. It's the next big Yana city, but smaller Yana, but close enough if you need to plug into your immigrant communities, you know, in the big city.
So you can still find the food.
Yeah, so you can, and the hip things, and you can go to the party and the wedding if you have to, you know what I mean? So we grew up in Providence, and I was surrounded by a lot of immigrants. I grew up with people from Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia and the Caribbean and West Africa and African Americans who had been there for generations and generations, from the African Americans who were the descendants of the enslaved who, you know, were from Rhode Island back when it was a slave port, to African Americans whose families had come up in the Great Migration that had taken place, you know, in the earlier part of the 20th century. So it was, you know, the Dominicans and Mexicans and Puerto Ricans and Haitians. And at the time, I didn't realize like what a gift and a privilege that was, you know? I kind of located myself, I think, within that as, okay, I'm also somebody who goes home and speaks a funny language and eats funny food, you know? But when we come to school, you know, we all dance to the same music and talk about the same TV shows, and we're all little Americans, you know what I mean? But everybody was going home and eating something else. I was eating pap, somebody else was eating platanos, somebody else was eating pho, you know? And it's strange how, you know, in that reality, because of how deep white supremacy is, and I guess how deep the conditioning of school is, now I think about it, we should have had the space to really celebrate our diversity and share it, you know? But I think the privilege of growing up in a house with parents who had the politics that my parents had was that I was not completely annihilated by the information that I was getting at school, you know, either about myself or about history, you know. So there was the practice of of talking back, talking back to what I'm getting in the textbook, talking back to what we're seeing on the news, talking back to what we're reading in the newspapers. I carried that on at school. So, American school system teaches you that slavery is the biggest thing that's ever happened to Black people, that Black history begins and ends with slavery. And it rehashes the same icons over and over again. That's how it was in my childhood. You learn, and incredible people, incredible icons, badass revolutionaries, Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and, Martin Luther King. But even the way that you're taught, they've been stripped of their most radical elements and the most radical parts of their identities, right? So by the time you're encountering them in the U.S. textbook, it's like the flattest, most palatable version of who they are to whiteness, So the practice of going home and asking, going home and opening up the encyclopedia, going to the library and reading and checking and having that dialogue, that inculcated the thing that, okay, what's written on paper comes from somebody. This is not just fact. Fact is fiction, and all information is worthy of interrogation. It comes with an agenda, When we came back to South Africa, I remember I had a really powerful history teacher at school, and he taught us that historiography as a practice, that the study of history is not just the study of the events, it's the study of who documented that history and why, So I think all of these things were kind of shaping the voice that ended up coming out in my art, in my poetry, in the work that I do as a communicator, as a storyteller. But I didn't realize that I was an artist until I got to university. I'd kept a journal my whole life from, when I was a little kid, before the internet, people went to libraries.
A simpler kind of time.
A simpler kind of time. My mom taught me how to use the library when I was really young, and I loved the library and I loved books. And, there wasn't a lot of money for much of the stuff that we wanted when we were growing up, but if I wanted a book, I got it, or my mom showed me how to get it at the library, So I am an avid reader. And by the time I got to university, I got exposed to the spoken word scene. This was like in the late 90s, early 2000s in Johannesburg. So literally this was in the heart of the youth creative revolution of this country, right? It was like apartheid ended and, the new South Africa was born. New identity formation became such a big project, a big national project, all of a sudden as well because of the integration of human rights culture, freedom of expression, the possibility for the possibilities for different kinds of art forms, expression, for stories, for just a creative explosion from people who had previously been marginalized or silenced, So you had like youth culture just exploding. You had like Boom Shaka and Kwaito and the beginnings of South African hip hop, but also like underground stuff happening as well, like trip hop and drum and bass and, experimental live art and performance art, going to a club and seeing a poet or an MC or a comedian with the band and then a live painter and a dancer. Spaces like Con Hill were being transformed at that time into what we understand them as now. So you had, witnessing the landscape of the city changing, witnessing a space like Con Hill changing from being women's jail to becoming the Constitutional Court. Politburo used to host parties at Con Hill. The first time I saw Nelisiwe Xaba perform, the first time I saw so many DJs like from that time. And there was this interesting cross-pollination of politics and art in the worlds that I found myself moving through as a young person. My family stayed in Yeovil. My family's from Soweto, so we started out in Soweto when we came back. Then we went to Yeovil. I lived in Yeovil for 10 years. I still see myself as a child of Yeovil in many ways,
People do not escape Yeovil.
No, you don't escape.
Like from what I can gather,
Yovo's a
stays in your heart.
philosophy. It's a philosophy.
It's a way of life.
It's a way of life. Born. It's always been immigrants, right? So even from back in the day, you know, the early 20th century when it was the Eastern European Jews and, you know, that those waves of European immigrants who were fleeing the war who were coming, right? Yovo was created for them. So Yovo has a high street that had shops. Everything was in walking distance. I was so spoiled because of Yovo because I didn't get a license because Yovo, everything was in walking distance. And if it wasn't walking distance, you could get a cab any time of the night. So I could go where I wanted to go and I could grow as an artist. I could do gigs. I could travel. I could be out as a young woman in the night, right? So Yovo is there's schools in walking distances. There's churches and shuls in walking distance. So it's villagey, you know. It's like a community. And by the time we moved there in the late 90s, there were my street had a drug dealer and, you know, there were the sex workers who stayed next door. There was my Afrikaans teacher who stayed like 2 houses away. There was a lady in parliament on the corner. There was the crooked cop across the street. So it was really, you know.
Something for everyone.
Something for everybody. But I realized like it was that period where it was transitioning into becoming a slum. You know, I think white people then already saw it as a slum. They were running away. You know, we got there as the white people were leaving, but the artists stayed behind. You know, so we got the artists, the immigrants, the hippie revolutionary whites who wouldn't leave. You know,
there's always a few.
There's always a few. There's always. It was a great vibe, and that space. I feel like that was my art school. That was where I saw what a creative life looked like. Looking at Lebo Mashile stayed across the street from me at some point.
What?
Lebo Mashile stayed across the street from me for 18 months when I was in high school. Imagine that. Like Boom Shaka had that whole blow up. And she was the sweetest. She was crazy, but she was so sweet. And the street used to get irritated with her because, you know, they would have like parties all night. I loved it. Like they were playing amazing music. It was the best. It was the best. It was the best.
We have to take a minute and a beat to talk about the late, great Lebo Mashile. I first arrived in South Africa a long time ago, and one of the songs I was obsessed with was I Love Music by Lebo Mashile. It was magical and had my teenage self spinning around. What I didn't realize then was this was one of the first instances I saw of a Black girl being truly unapologetic. I was one of those sit like a lady, stop playing in the mud, get down from that tree kind of little girls, which was kind of a foreshadowing of who I was going to become. Like, look, if you know, you know. Lebo was proud and unapologetic and wore track pants to random places and did what and who she wanted, which I loved. The legend goes that Brenda Fassie walked so Lebo Mashile could run. Or maybe they both ran. They kind of like overlapped. But Brenda Fassie was brash and also unapologetic. I'm just going to keep using that word because that's what they were. And was so bold that they didn't even have to come out back in the 90s. She was just gay. 1 minute, there was no girlfriend. Next minute, there was a girlfriend. And the whole country and continent moved on. No controversy, just queer vibes. Bold, proud Black women. Now do yourself a solid and go listen to some Boom Shaka and take yourself back in time. Just go listen to the entire body of work of Lebo Mashile, Brenda Fassie. Just take yourself back. It's a vibe. It's a vibe and I highly recommend.
The standards by which, I was taught to kind of gauge whose art was popping and whose art wasn't. It was based on your skill, on your offering, on the content, on what you're saying, and the politics of what you're saying also mattered, And these were also young people who were working in spaces like SABC, who were working for Mail and Guardian. They were journalists, they were media practitioners. So stuff that blew up on the underground very quickly made it mainstream, Okay. And I think that's how I was able to grow and to maneuver and to find myself working on much bigger platforms. You know, the distance between the underground and the mainstream at that stage was like, well, by the time I figured out like, okay, this is what I want to do, and I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna do it and do it and do it to death until I become the best at it. You know.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you. It was empowering to realize that, you know, you can, again, right? I can make my own narrative, you know? I can make my own narrative even about myself. I can make my own narrative about the things that I care about. I can introduce narratives into the space. I can shift narratives, you know? Which is not always clean work. It's often messy work.
It's often hard work.
It's often very hard work, yeah. And you get a lot of backlash for it as well, too.
So speaking of the backlash,
hey,
what was it like being a woman in this industry?
Oh my God.
Because I know some people, like my partner is kind of vaguely, but the more theater side, but you've dabbled in that.
Yeah, I do theater, yeah.
There's so many menses there. I'm just going to go on record saying,
God.
How is everything a male-dominated industry? Number one.
Right.
Number two, what was it like for you? Like, what was it like? You know, just sit here. This is a therapy session. Do what
this
you
need. This is a therapy session. Ooh, and these earrings are heavy. Okay, let me take them out.
No, release the earrings.
Let's release the earrings. We've got other shiny things happening. Right.
Yeah. And the burden of a woman.
Story. The burden of a woman. The burden of a woman. No. Man, you know, that part of the journey has been trash, continues to be trash. The misogyny of it all is trash. I think, though, you know, the just embodied feminine energy is just such a powerful creative force. I've never felt sorry for myself as a woman. I've never felt sorry for myself for being a woman, because the experience of being a woman is such a fucking powerful
It's magical.
thing. It is magical. And it just unfolds layers and layers and layers and layers. And it gets better. It gets sweeter. You get smarter. You get stronger. You become more sensitive. You get closer to yourself. You know, I'm perimenopausal, transitioning into menopause. And it's just like, I mean, my relationship with my body, my relationship with my confidence, my relationship with even my past, like, I kind of look at all these different things that I've been through and all these different versions of myself, and they feel like my kids, you know? So healing now feels like holding space for 37-year-old me, holding space for 25-year-old me, holding space for 22-year-old me who was just entering the industry and didn't realize what she was getting into. You know what I mean?
It's that time again. The part where the guest says the quiet part out loud. What I'm loving about this segment is that it's becoming something that organically comes up. Like it writes itself. I don't even have to ask the question anymore. The guest has a moment where they're like, actually, I've been wanting to talk about this for a hot damn minute. This is the part where you say the thing that will have people rushing to your comment section with the fire of 1,000 suns. In this instance, Lebo breaks down how the entertainment industry runs on the cannibalized flesh of women. Yeah, it is that.
Is by design. Loves cannibalizing young female flesh. Oh, I'm so glad to be talking to you, because I can finally have a place outside of my own head to talk about this shit.
No, we must say the things.
Let's say the things.
Say the wild thing.
Say the wild thing. So there's a reason why you think about all of your favorite artists. Think about all of them. All your favorite women artists, all your favorite Black women artists. Why is it that their biggest albums are their first and second albums, or their first and second shows, or their first and second projects? Because that's when they were at their most vulnerable and easiest to manipulate. We cannibalize young women. This industry cannibalizes young women, right? And I remember being told by women who I love and respect, formidable, brilliant women, were like, you're not going to have a career past 35. I'm 46.
Yo.
right?
Like to your face.
Yeah, you're not going to have a career. And I mean, these were women who were saying it because they'd experienced it. It's not like they were bullshitting me and they were saying, they were telling me because they were hating on me. They were saying it because that's what the industry was actively doing to them.
That was just the fact.
That was the fact,
Lebo takes the idea of sucking the life force out of the female form even further.
So, I think very early in my career, I knew that I was kind of straddling two terrains because I did have a big, visible mainstream platform on television, but I've always been a quirky artist. I've always been outside of the mainstream. I've always been defining and creating my artistic identity for myself, And I'm grateful for poetry because while I was building this, I guess it's not, then it was two very clear streams. Now it's kind of many streams, but poetry, theater.
And action!
Despite the fact that life is filled with people and things that want to derail you, take from you, and discard you, Lebo stayed the course and stayed true to herself.
The arts anchored me into an artistic identity that wasn't defined by the mainstream.
Okay.
So I was able to leave, the popular culture world of television and the way that I was packaged in television and the way, television and mainstream media sell art and sell people and sell brands and commodities and people as commodities. I was able to leave that world and then find myself in the world of poetry where I was standing on stage with writers in their 70s and in their 60s and who were kicking ass at what they do. And, and in a space where people were working intergenerationally and where knowledge was a cumulative thing, right? I mean, Kagure died with his laptop on his legs in hospital, Toni Morrison published the year or 2 years before she died, right? Bell hooks, so as a writer, your intellectual life and your creative life lasts as long as you last. It lasts as long as you choose. So I realized that, okay, I'm being primed, I'm being cooked in this industry, again, coming back to feminist principles, right? Mm-hmm. I'm being primed, I'm being cooked in this industry that packages people for a very short shelf life, and all the anxiety that comes with it and all the cruelty that comes with that, right? Mm-hmm. But then on the other hand, I'm like, but also I'm running a marathon.
With the poetry, it was a long con.
This is a long, long, long haul. I'll always do this.
Okay.
I'll always have this. And this thing is a mutating thing. This thing can become theater. This thing can become visual art. This thing can become fashion. This thing can become whatever I want it to be. It's mine, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that has been liberating. Probably one of the reasons why I've been able to survive is because I wasn't solely defined by the machinery of fame. I never have been.
Okay.
Yeah. And I entered that world as an artist.
Again, it goes back to define yourself despite the forces around you, figuring out what your vibes are and locking in. For Lebo, the heart of a hustler always beats strong.
Also, again, in my early 20s, I mean, my mother being a single mother, she wasn't enthusiastic about the idea that I wanted to be an artist. So I knew that I had to make a living, and I've always been a hustler. I've always been a working girl. I've always, I grew up, I babysat, I did hair, I worked in retail. I was a receptionist. I did temp work. I did switchboard. Like, if the one thing the girl knows how to do, it is to work. I will find a job. I will make a job. I work my ass off.
You will make rent.
Please. I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear, So I was like, okay, what can I do? Everybody's telling me that I'm a great poet, but everybody's also telling me I'll never make a living doing this. How am I going to make a living? I have an ability with language. I have an ability to connect with people. What can I do with these things? All right, I can communicate. I can work on TV. I can work in broadcasting. I can write. I can do columns. I can write plays. I can record. I can do albums. I can do, and then, 25 years later, I've done those things.
You have.
I've done those things. I've worked in media as a presenter and as a producer on multiple shows. I've worked as a voiceover artist, voicing documentaries, voicing current affairs shows, voicing ads, voicing campaigns, being the voice of, brands and all kinds of stuff. I've emceed, I've facilitated, I've worked for big multinational Fortune 500 brands. I've done script writing for CEOs, I write my ass off. And that's apart from my own artistic body of work, the books and the poems and the plays and the art that I have made that will outlive me.
And that's a wrap for part 1. Make sure you show up for part 2 as we continue the conversation with Lebo. In the next episode, we throw in thoughts on feminist fuckery, changing hearts and minds, and the burden of Black women. Shout out to the Global Unit for Feminist and Gender Democracy of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation that is hosting this podcast, and my magical team, Ray and Sheldon, for that post-apocalyptic production. Till the next episode, pick up gardening and make Bloody Marys from your homegrown tomatoes. Take up erotic poetry and gift your masterpieces to people as birthday presents, or even learn to knit and exclusively make lingerie. Because it's all chaos anyway, and this is not the apocalypse we signed up for.